A man and his daughter walks down the aisle. The girl holds a worn teddy bear. The man wears an old, faded canvas jacket. They find their
Daddy,
seats,
look!
1A
It has a
and
pillow.
1B.
We can see the clouds so close.
Just for you,
Suddenly,
baby.
a shadow
Anything for
falls
you.
over them.
Excuse me, you're in the wrong section. Main cabin boarding is through the rear.
No, we're in the right place. First class, seats 1A and 1B.
These are clearly fake or a system glitch. People like you don't just buy these seats. I'm gonna have to ask you to move to the back of the plane immediately.
Check the system, ma'am. Marcus Vance. I assure you, we belong here.
Don't you threaten me! Security! I have a non-compliant passenger refusing to vacate first class. He is making the other passenger uncomfortable.
Daddy! Daddy, what did we do wrong? Are they gonna take us to jail?
Get your bags and move to the back before I have you forcefully removed and blacklisted. Move!
They stood up and were about to leave. Then the captain came out.
Wait! Stop them! Shut up! Did you even check their boarding pass?
And in front of every passenger on that aircraft, he came to attention and raised a full military salute and held it on the man in the worn jacket until the entire cabin went silent. Nobody understood what they were witnessing, not yet. But before that flight landed, every single person on board would, and not one of them would ever forget it. The little girl traveling with him had one question after it was all over. She looked up at her father and asked him something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Keep watching. The seat was everything he had promised her. Wide leather, extra legroom, a window that showed the whole tarmac stretching out into the gray morning light. Simone Williams had pressed her face against that window the moment they sat down, and had not moved since, her breath making small clouds on the glass, her eyes tracking every luggage cart and ground crew worker with the focused wonder of someone experiencing something for the first time, and determined not to miss a single detail. Harry watched her and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he had done something right. The cabin was filling around them. The quiet choreography of early boarding, flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency, overhead bins closing one by one, the low murmur of people settling in. Harry stretched his left leg into the extra space the way his physical therapist had told him to on long flights, the specific angle that kept the pain manageable, and leaned back in the seat and thought about Faith. She would have loved this. Not the first class itself. Faith had never cared much about that. But the look on Simone's face right now, that was exactly the kind of thing Faith used to live for. The unguarded joy of their daughter encountering something new. Take our little girl there for me. Those had been her exact words, spoken in the hospital room with the particular quiet of someone who has accepted what is coming and is using the time that remains for the things that matter. The Grand Canyon. I want her to stand somewhere that big. I want her to understand that hope doesn't have a ceiling. Harry had kept the sealed letter Faith wrote for Simone in the inside pocket of his jacket since the day Faith pressed it into his hands. 3 years. Through the grief and the construction shifts and the weekend mechanic jobs and every dollar set aside in the old coffee tin on top of the refrigerator, he had carried it through all of it, waiting for this exact trip. He would give it to Simone at the edge of the canyon. That had been the promise. He was not a man who broke promises. The boarding door opened again, and a group of late passengers filtered in. Harry glanced up briefly, then back at Simone, who had moved from the window to examining the tray table with the same methodical interest she brought to everything new. "Daddy," she said. "It folds." "It does," he said. "Can I fold it?" "You can fold it." She folded it with great seriousness. Harry did not notice the flight attendant's expression change until she was already standing beside their row. She was professional about it. That was the thing he would remember later. The smile stayed in place the entire time. It was only the eyes that did something different. The brief recalibration that happened so fast most people would have missed it. Harry had spent 42 years learning to catch it in the half-second before it disappeared. "Sir," she said pleasantly, "I'm so sorry to bother you. There seems to be a seating issue with this row." Harry looked at her. "A seating issue? That's right. Would you mind stepping into the aisle for just a moment, while we sort it out?" He did not move immediately. "These are our seats. I have the boarding passes." "Of course." The smile stayed. This will only take a moment. Behind her, making his way down the first-class aisle with the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to rooms adjusting themselves around him, was a businessman in a charcoal suit, carry-on rolling smoothly behind him. No boarding pass visible in his hand. Just the settled certainty of someone who expected this to resolve in his favor. The flight attendant turned toward him with a warmth that arrived faster and sat more naturally than anything she had offered Harry. "Mr. Dolan, thank you so much for your patience." Passengers nearby had gone quieter. Harry could feel it without looking, the particular quality of attention that a room develops when something uncomfortable is happening, and no one wants to be caught watching, but everyone is. Simone had stopped folding the tray table. She looked at the flight attendant, then at the businessman, then at her father. Harry reached into his jacket and removed the boarding passes. He held them out. Row 3, seats A and B. Both of them. The flight attendant glanced at the passes without taking them. "Sir, I understand, but we have a situation with the manifest that we need to—" "The manifest," Harry said. "Yes, if you could just step into the aisle." He had spent 20 years in the army, learning how to read a room. He read this one in about 4 seconds. The businessman, who had not produced a boarding pass. The flight attendant, who had glanced at his passes without actually reading them. The 2 nearby passengers, who were now studying their phones, with sudden devotion. He knew exactly what this was. He had known it since the moment her expression changed. Harry Williams was 42 years old. Former staff sergeant, 2 combat deployments, permanently injured in the line of duty. He walked with a limp that worsened in cold weather and had learned to plan his days around it. He worked construction during the week and took mechanic jobs on weekends, and he wore his work clothes because they were what he had, and he did not apologize for any of it. He had spent years watching rooms make calculations about him before he opened his mouth. He had learned to carry that the way he carried everything else. Quietly, without letting it decide anything about who he was. But Simone was 8 years old, and she was sitting in her first airplane seat, on the trip her mother had asked him to give her, watching a woman with a fixed smile ask her father to stand up and move. "Daddy," her voice was very small. "Did we do something wrong?" The cabin had gone almost fully quiet now. Harry looked at his daughter, at the careful way she was watching him, trying to understand what the adults around her were doing, and why none of it made sense. "No," he said. "We didn't do anything wrong." He looked back at the flight attendant, who was waiting with her smile and her patience and her absolute certainty about how this was going to go. "Mr. Dolan needs to be seated," she said quietly. "I'm going to have to ask you and your daughter to gather your belongings." Harry did not argue. He had learned a long time ago, in places considerably harder than this, that some battles were not won by arguing. He looked at Simone, who was looking at him, and he kept his face steady, because the one thing he was not going to do was let her see him come apart in this aisle. He reached up and opened the overhead bin. "Daddy!" Simone's voice caught slightly. "Why doesn't she believe us?" The question sat in the quiet of the cabin, and nobody answered it. Harry lifted down their bags. He did not look at the businessman. He did not look at the passengers who were not looking at him. He took Simone's hand, and he started walking toward the back of the plane. Harry had learned something in the army that most people never had occasion to learn. That the way you carry yourself in the worst moment is the only thing you actually control. Not the moment itself. Not what other people do inside it. Not the outcome. Just the way you move through it. Just the posture you maintain when everything else is being decided by forces that have nothing to do with your character or your worth. He had learned this in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a first-class cabin. He applied it now. He stopped walking and turned around. "I'd like you to look at these," he said to the flight attendant, holding out the boarding passes with the quiet steadiness of a man who has decided not to raise his voice and means it. "Row 3, seats A and B. Issued in my name and my daughter's. Paid for in full." The flight attendant took them this time. She looked at them for a moment with the expression of someone performing a task rather than actually doing it, her eyes moving across the passes without landing on anything. "I understand," she said, "and I'm so sorry for the confusion. But our manifest is showing a conflict with this row, and until we can get it sorted with the gate. How long have you been looking at those? Harry asked. She stopped. The passes, he said. How long did you look at them before you told me there was an error? A pause. Sir, I'm simply trying to resolve. You glanced at them, Harry said. Not accusing, just stating. You didn't read them, you looked at them the way someone looks at something they've already decided doesn't say what it says. The flight attendant's smile did not waver, but something behind it shifted. She handed the passes back. I understand your frustration, she said. But Mr. Dolan has documentation indicating this row, and we need to honor that while we sort out the discrepancy. Harry looked at the businessman. Mr. Dolan was standing in the aisle with the patience of someone who had arranged for this to be handled and was simply waiting for the handling to complete. He had not produced a boarding pass. He had not been asked for one. He met Harry's gaze briefly, then looked away toward the front of the cabin with the mild interest of someone waiting for a traffic light. He had not been asked a single question, not one. Harry had been asked to stand, to move, to gather his belongings. He had been told there was a conflict and an error and a situation, and the man standing in the aisle with no visible documentation had been addressed by name and thanked for his patience. The arithmetic of it was not complicated. Around them, the cabin had developed the specific texture of a room pretending not to pay attention while paying complete attention. Harry caught fragments without trying to. He must have boarded the wrong section. I've seen this before. Upgrade mix-up probably. Someone should have caught it at the gate. Not one person asked him a question. Not one person looked at the boarding passes in his hand. The story had already been written by the time he stood up. Written in the half-second when the flight attendant's eyes had moved across him and made their assessment, and now the room was simply filling in around the story it had already decided was true. Harry looked down at Simone. She was holding his hand with both of hers, which was what she did when she was trying not to cry. She had learned it from Faith, that specific two-handed grip, the instinct to hold on to something solid when the world felt unsteady. Harry had not been able to look at it without feeling it somewhere deep in his chest since the first time he noticed her doing it, after her mother died. He thought about arguing. He had the passes. He had the receipts on his phone. He could make this loud and documented and difficult, and he would be right to do it. And not one part of what he was feeling would be wrong or unearned. He thought about Faith. Never let other people's ignorance decide who you become. She had said it to him once, after a contractor had spoken over him at a job site for 20 minutes, before realizing he was the foreman. She had said it without anger, with the particular clarity of someone who had figured something out and wanted to give it to him so he could use it. What they do says everything about them. What you do next says everything about you. He thought about Simone, about what she was going to carry from this moment, about the specific lesson that was available to her right now, depending on what her father did next. She was 8 years old, and she was watching, and she would remember. He would not let her first memory of flying be her father losing himself in an airplane aisle. He took a breath. He smiled at her. Not a performance, not a lie. Just the specific smile he had developed over 3 years of hard mornings. The one that said, I've got you, and we're going to be all right. Because he believed it, even when it cost him something to believe it. Come on, superstar, he said quietly. Let's go find our seats. He took her hand and turned and began walking toward the curtain at the back of first class. Simone walked beside him. She was trying. He could feel it in her grip. The effort of a child matching her father's composure because she trusted it, even when she didn't understand it. They were almost to the curtain, almost through it. Then Simone's voice came, barely above a whisper. Not meant for the cabin, just for him. Daddy, is it because we don't look like everyone else? Harry stopped walking. He had been hit by things in his life that left marks. Physical things, the kind that required surgery and rehabilitation and years of learning to move differently. He had been hit by grief that didn't have a shape or a location. The kind that just lived in everything for a long time. This landed differently than any of it, because she had said it without anger. Without accusation, just with the honest, searching confusion of a child trying to make sense of the world, using the information available to her. and the information available to her, right now, in this moment, had pointed her toward the most painful possible conclusion. And he did not have an answer that was both true and something she was ready to carry. He was still trying to find one when he heard it. The cockpit door. It opened without announcement, without the particular click that preceded the captain's intercom. Just opened, and a man in a uniform stepped out into the first-class cabin. The captain. He was not looking at the businessman. He was not looking at the flight attendant. He was looking directly at Harry. And something in his expression suggested that he had been watching for longer than anyone realized, and that what he had seen had not sat well with him at all. The captain's name tag read Calloway. He was somewhere in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the particular bearing of a man who had spent decades making consequential decisions in small spaces, and had learned to move through the world without wasted motion. He came down the first-class aisle at a measured pace, not rushing, not performing urgency, just moving, with the quiet purpose of someone who had assessed a situation and decided what needed to happen next. He walked past the flight attendant. He walked past Mr. Dolan. He stopped in front of Harry Williams. The cabin was fully silent now, in the way that cabins rarely are. Not the settled quiet of pre-departure routine, but the held-breath silence of 200 people who understood without being told that something significant was happening and had collectively decided not to interfere with it. Captain Calloway looked at Harry for a moment. Just looked at him, taking in the limp, the worn jacket, the boarding passes still held in one hand, and Simone standing beside her father with her two-handed grip and her careful eyes. Then he straightened. His right hand came up slowly, deliberately, with the precise geometry of someone who had performed this motion 10,000 times and understood exactly what it meant. A full military salute. Held. Harry went completely still. It had been years since anyone had rendered him that. Years since he had stood in a context where it meant what it meant, where the language of it was understood by both people using it. He had spent those years becoming invisible in the ways that civilian life required. The flannel shirts and the construction sites and the 2 jobs and the quiet, unglamorous work of raising a daughter alone. He had packed the other version of himself away because there was no place for it in the ordinary days, and ordinary days were what Simone needed. Standing in this aisle, with a captain in full uniform holding a salute on him in front of a silent cabin, the packed-away version of Harry Williams came back to the surface without asking permission. He straightened. His own hand came up. He returned the salute. 2 men, one in uniform and one in a worn jacket, holding the salute between them in the aisle of a commercial aircraft, while the world around them stayed completely still. When Captain Calloway lowered his hand, he turned to face the cabin with the unhurried calm of a man about to say something that only needed to be said once. He looked at the flight attendant first. "Did anyone verify this man's boarding pass?" he asked. His voice was even, no heat in it. Just the question, placed in the room where it needed to be. Silence. He waited. Nobody spoke. "His name is Harry Williams," the captain said. "He is seated in row 3, seats A and B, which he paid for. Both of them." He paused. "Mr. Williams will remain exactly where he is." The flight attendant's composure had not broken, but it had changed. The specific change of someone recalibrating in real time, understanding that the footing they had been standing on was not what they thought it was. "Of course," she said quietly. "I apologize for the confusion." Captain Calloway turned to Mr. Dolan. The businessman had the look of a man who had arrived at a situation expecting one outcome and was now standing inside a completely different one, with no clear path to the exit. His certainty had left him sometime in the last 60 seconds, and what remained was a kind of visible discomfort that he was managing with less success than he would have liked. "Sir," the captain said, "my crew will find you a seat." It was not a question. Mr. Dolan nodded once. "Of course," he said. "I had no idea. I'm sorry." He said the last part in Harry's direction without quite meeting his eyes, then turned and followed a crew member toward the back of the cabin. Harry watched him go. He did not feel satisfaction about it. He was not built for satisfaction about other people's embarrassment. He just watched and then looked back at his daughter. Simone was watching her father with an expression he hadn't seen on her face today. Not the wonder of the window seat. Not the careful bravery of a child trying to match her father's composure. Something quieter and more specific than either of those things. The expression of someone who has just received information that has rearranged their understanding of something important. She was looking at him the way she used to look at Faith when Faith did something that surprised her. Like she was seeing him for the first time. Around them, the cabin had begun to breathe again. Conversations restarting in the careful way they restart after something everyone witnessed, but no one is quite sure how to discuss. The whispers that had moved so confidently through the rows 20 minutes ago had stopped. A woman 2 rows back said something quiet to the man beside her, and he nodded. A man across the aisle, somewhere in his 60s, with a veterans organization pin on his lapel, caught Harry's eye and gave him a single nod. The kind that didn't require anything added to it. Harry nodded back. He settled Simone back into her window seat. She pressed her face to the glass again, but she kept glancing back at him, checking, reassessing. "Daddy," she said finally. "Yeah, that man saluted you." "He did." She thought about this. "Why?" Harry looked at his daughter, at Faith's eyes looking back at him from her small face. "Some people recognize things," he said. "Things other people miss." She seemed to accept this, turning it over in the quiet, methodical way she processed information that hadn't fully resolved yet. The flight took off. Harry watched the ground fall away through the window and thought about Faith and the sealed letter in his jacket pocket and the canyon waiting at the other end of this flight. He thought about the 3 years of construction shifts and mechanic jobs and every dollar in the coffee tin. He thought about a salute held in a silent cabin and what it had done to something in his chest that had been closed for a long time. He had been invisible for so long he had half forgotten what it felt like not to be. He did not know why Captain Calloway had recognized him. He assumed it was the limp. The bearing that military service left on a man whether he wanted it or not. The way of standing that didn't fully leave even after the uniform did. He assumed it was one veteran reading another across a room the way they sometimes did. The specific recognition that required no introduction. He did not know there was another reason. He found out an hour into the flight, when the flight attendant, a different one, appeared at his elbow, with a manner that carried something in it he hadn't expected. "Mr. Williams," she said, "the captain would like to speak with you, if you're willing." Harry looked at Simone, who had fallen into the light sleep of a child who had experienced too much before noon. He arranged her blanket carefully and followed the flight attendant toward the front of the cabin, his limp more pronounced in the narrow aisle. The cockpit door opened. Captain Calloway half turned in his seat, first officer at the controls, and looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment he can put it down. "Mr. Williams," he said, "thank you for coming up." Harry nodded. "I need to tell you something." The captain's voice had changed from what it had been in the cabin. The authority was still there, but something underneath it had loosened. "I've been hoping to meet you for 12 years. Harry looked at him. "Sir?" Captain Calloway met his eyes. 12 years, he said again. Steady, certain. "I just never knew your name until I saw the manifest this morning." Captain Calloway was quiet for a moment after he said it. Not the quiet of someone collecting words. The quiet of someone who has waited a very long time for a moment and now that the moment is here, is moving through it carefully, because it deserves that. "There was a convoy," he said finally, 12 years ago. Eastern Province, escorting a group of civilians through a corridor that intelligence had cleared. He paused. Intelligence was wrong. Harry went still. He knew which convoy before the captain said anything else. He had known it the moment the man said 12 years. Known it the way you know certain things that have been folded into the structure of who you are. Things that don't require retrieval because they never fully left. 3 vehicles, Calloway continued. The lead truck took the first hit. Second vehicle caught fire within 30 seconds. There were civilians in that second vehicle. Aid worker, 2 journalists, and a woman traveling with a medical relief team. He stopped. She was 7 months pregnant. Harry looked at the cockpit window, at the clouds moving past at 30,000 feet. The soldiers on the ground took cover, Calloway said. Standard protocol. Active fire, secondary explosions imminent. You don't go back in. Every trained instinct says you stay down. He looked at Harry directly. One man didn't stay down. Harry said nothing. He went in twice before anyone else moved, pulled the aid worker out, went back for one of the journalists. By the third approach, the secondary explosion had already happened, and half the vehicle was gone, and he went back in anyway. Calloway's voice had changed, thinning slightly at the edges. He got the woman out, shielded her when the last charge went, took the impact himself. A pause. He lost most of the use of his left leg that day. The cockpit was very quiet. Harry kept his eyes on the clouds. He had not spoken about that day to anyone outside of the official debrief. Not to Faith, not fully, not the way it actually happened. He had told her enough that she understood why he came home the way he did, with the limp and the hardware in his back, and the particular kind of silence that settled over him, sometimes without warning. She had accepted the outline without pushing for the details, because she understood, the way Faith understood most things, that some of what he carried was not meant to be transferred. The medal from that day was in a drawer in his bedroom. He had not taken it out since the day they gave it to him. A medal like that was not a trophy. It was a record, and the record contained things alongside the heroism that he did not need to look at on ordinary days. I spent 12 years trying to find that soldier, Calloway said. The official reports had a unit designation and a rank. Staff sergeant, no name in the version that reached me. My wife spent weeks trying to go through proper channels and hit walls every direction. He shook his head slightly. We knew there was a man. We knew what he did. We knew he was injured getting her out. We didn't know his name. We didn't know if he was still alive. He reached into his breast pocket and placed something on the small surface beside him. A photograph. A woman, dark-haired, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on a very pregnant stomach, standing in a dusty courtyard somewhere that was not America. My wife, Calloway said. 7 months along in that picture. That was taken 2 weeks before the convoy. Harry looked at the photograph. The baby, he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. 12 years old, Calloway said. Her name is Grace. She plays soccer, and she reads everything she can get her hands on, and she has her mother's laugh. He stopped. Every birthday she has celebrated, every soccer game, every book she has ever read, exists because a staff sergeant went back into a burning vehicle 3 times when he had every reason to stay down. Harry pressed his lips together. He looked at the photograph for a long moment, at the woman laughing in the dusty courtyard, and thought about the version of her he had carried out of that vehicle, the weight of her, the specific urgency of getting her low and covered when he heard the charge. He had not known her name. He had not known anything about her except that she was there and she was alive and she needed to stay that way. He had not thought of it as a choice in the moment. That was the thing people never understood when they used the word hero. There had been no moment of decision, no weighing of options. There had just been the vehicle and the fire and the people inside it and the complete impossibility of staying down while they were still in there. It was not courage exactly. It was the absence of an alternative. He could not have stayed down any more than he could have stopped breathing. He had come home to Faith afterward, and she had held him for a long time without asking questions, and he had let her. And that had been enough. I looked at the manifest this morning, Calloway said, and I saw the name, Williams, H, and something made me look twice. I don't know what, just something. He shook his head. I asked my flight attendant to pull the veteran status flag on the booking, and it was there. Staff Sergeant, retired. And I sat up here, and I thought about the odds, and I decided the odds didn't matter, because I wasn't going to let this flight leave the gate without knowing. He looked at Harry steadily. When Sandra told me what was happening in the cabin, what they were doing to you and your daughter, He stopped, collected himself. I want you to understand something. Even if you weren't the man, even if I was wrong about who you were, what was happening to you in that cabin was not going to continue on my aircraft. His jaw tightened slightly. But I wasn't wrong. Harry looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "You weren't wrong." Calloway put his hand over his mouth briefly. Just for a moment. The gesture of a man keeping something contained that very much wants not to be. "My daughter is 12 years old," he said. "She learned to ride a bike last spring. She calls me every night when I'm on a trip because she doesn't like to go to sleep without saying goodnight." He looked at Harry with the full, unguarded weight of a father who knows exactly what he has and what it cost. "She exists because of what you did. My wife is alive because of what you did. I have my family because a man I never met decided he was not going to leave anyone behind." The words landed and stayed. Harry looked back at the clouds. He thought about Faith, about the specific way she used to sit with him in the dark at 3 in the morning, when the worst of it surfaced, her head on his shoulder, no words required. He thought about what she would say right now, in this cockpit, if she could see this. He thought she would probably not say anything. She would just take his hand the way she always did and let the moment be what it was. He became aware of something behind him. He turned. Simone was standing in the cockpit doorway. She had woken up and found him gone, and followed, the way she always followed when she woke somewhere, and he wasn't immediately visible. She was still half asleep, her hair pressed flat on one side, her eyes moving between her father and the captain with the slow focus of someone assembling a picture from pieces. She had been there long enough. Harry could see it in her face. Not everything. She was 8, and some of it was beyond her yet, but enough. The convoy, the fire, the woman and the baby. Her father going back in. She looked at Captain Calloway. Then she looked at Harry. Something shifted in her expression that he had no word for. It was not surprise exactly, because some part of her had always known her father was something the world hadn't fully accounted for. It was more like confirmation, like a thing she had believed without evidence finally receiving its evidence. She crossed the small space between them and pressed herself against his side, without saying anything. Harry put his arm around her. Calloway looked at the two of them and made no attempt to conceal what was on his face. "I'm sorry about your wife," he said to Harry. "Sandra mentioned it. I'm sorry." Harry nodded once. He looked out at the clouds again. Somewhere in the inside pocket of his jacket, pressed against his chest, was a sealed letter in Faith's handwriting, addressed to their daughter. He thought about standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, with Simone's hand in his, and giving it to her. He thought about what Faith had known when she made him promise that trip, what she had understood about what Simone would need, and when she would need it. He thought about a pregnant woman, laughing in a dusty courtyard, 2 weeks before everything changed. He thought about a 12-year-old girl named Grace, who played soccer and read everything she could find, and called her father every night before sleep. He looked at the clouds for a long time, and he thought that maybe Faith had known more about this journey than she had told him. That maybe the promise she asked him to keep was always going to be about more than the Grand Canyon. That some things in this life were not accidents, regardless of what the math said. The airline's response was swift and thorough in the way that institutions respond when they understand the full weight of what occurred on their aircraft. A regional director called before the plane landed. There were apologies, formal and genuine, in varying proportions. A full refund. An offer of lifetime first-class travel for Harry and Simone, extended without conditions. Harry accepted the apology. He accepted the refund. Then he made one request. "The flight attendant," he said. "Don't fire her." A pause on the other end of the call. "Mr. Williams, given what occurred." "I know what occurred," Harry said. "I was there. I'm asking you not to fire her. Retrain her. Give her the chance to understand what she did and why it was wrong. Ending her career doesn't fix anything. It just ends her career." There was a longer pause. "That's a generous position," the director said finally. "It's the only position I have," Harry said. 3 weeks later he received a letter. No company letterhead. Personal stationery. The flight attendant's name at the top. She did not apologize because he was a decorated veteran. She did not apologize because the captain had intervened, or because her employer had required it. She apologized because she had spent 3 weeks sitting with what she had done and had arrived, on her own, at the understanding that she had looked at a man and his daughter and made a decision about their worth before she knew a single true thing about them. She wrote that she thought about Simone's face. She wrote that she thought about it every day. Harry read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer beside his medal. He considered that sufficient. The Grand Canyon was everything Faith had said it would be. They stood at the south rim in the early morning, before the crowds arrived, when the light came in low and turned the canyon walls the color of something that didn't have a name yet. Simone stood at the railing and looked out at it with the complete, wordless attention of someone whose mind has been stopped by something larger than anything it has previously encountered. Harry stood beside her and let her have the silence. Then he reached into his jacket and took out the letter. It had been there for 3 years. Through the construction shifts and the mechanic jobs and the coffee tin filling dollar by dollar. Through the grief and the ordinary mornings and the long nights and the flight that had become something neither of them had expected. It had been against his chest through all of it, waiting for this exact morning, this exact light, this exact moment of his daughter standing at the edge of something breathtaking, with hope bigger than grief spread out in front of her. "This is from your mom," he said. Simone looked at the envelope. At her name in Faith's handwriting, she took it with both hands. She read it slowly, the way she read things that mattered, giving each line its full weight before moving to the next. Harry watched the canyon and let her read. He did not look at her face. That was hers. When she finished, she stood quietly for a moment. Then she leaned against him, and he held her while she cried. And he cried too, and the canyon held them both in its enormous, indifferent light. And the tears were grief and also something else. Something that had been waiting underneath the grief for a long time, and that something was peace. "She knew we'd be okay," Simone said finally. "She always knew," Harry said. Simone looked out at the canyon one more time. "I think she can see this," she said. "I think so too," Harry said. They stayed until the light changed. Months later, Captain Calloway called. His wife wanted to meet Harry. His daughter Grace wanted to meet the man her parents had talked about her entire life, the man whose name they had not known and had finally found. Harry drove to their home on a Saturday afternoon in November, with Simone beside him in the passenger seat, asking questions about Grace the whole way there. Elena Calloway opened the front door and looked at Harry for a moment, without speaking. Then she stepped forward and held him the way people hold someone they owe a debt they can never fully repay, with the full weight of what they know and what it cost. "Thank you," she said. "Every day, thank you." Harry held on and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment didn't already contain. Grace stood in the hallway behind her mother. 12 years old, dark-haired, with her mother's eyes and a soccer jersey and the particular self-possession of a child who had been told something enormous about a stranger, and was now meeting that stranger and finding him to be a quiet man in a worn jacket who smiled at her like she was exactly who she was supposed to be. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Harry said. She looked at him seriously. "My mom says you saved her life." "I did what anyone would have done," Harry said. Grace considered this with the focused skepticism of a 12-year-old who had heard the full story and knew that was not entirely accurate. "I don't think that's true," she said. Harry looked at her, at this child who existed because of a day he didn't talk about, who played soccer and read everything and called her father before sleep. "Maybe not," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went to find Simone, and within 4 minutes the two of them were in the backyard talking with the easy comfort of children who have not yet learned to be guarded around people they've just met. Harry stood at the kitchen window and watched them. Elena stood beside him with 2 cups of coffee and followed his gaze. "She's going to be something," Elena said, looking at Simone. "She already is," Harry said. He thought about Faith, about a letter read at the edge of a canyon in early morning light, about courage and kindness and forgiveness, and always looking beyond appearances to see the person within. He thought about a flight attendant who had looked at him and seen only what she expected to see. He thought about a captain who had looked at him and seen everything else. The difference between them was not complicated. It did not require a special gift or unusual perception. It only required the willingness to look long enough and honestly enough to find the story underneath the surface. To understand that the person standing in front of you contains chapters you have not read yet, and that those chapters deserve the chance to be known. Harry had spent 42 years being mistaken for something smaller than he was. He had learned to carry that without letting it decide anything about him. But standing in this kitchen, watching his daughter laugh in the backyard with the girl he had carried out of a burning vehicle before she existed, he thought about all the people who moved through the world unseen. The quiet ones, the worn jacket ones, the ones the room had already written a story about before they opened their mouth. Every one of them carrying something extraordinary that the world had not yet bothered to find. The greatest mistake was not malice. It was the glance, the half-second assessment that decided a person's worth before a single true thing was known about them. The captain had done something simple. He had looked long enough to see who was actually there. That was all it took. That was everything it took. If this story stayed with you, leave us a comment. Tell us about someone the world underestimated. Tell us about a moment when someone took the time to see who you actually were. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We tell them every week, and we don't waste your time. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest people in the room are sometimes carrying the heaviest things, and that the ones who look ordinary often have chapters in them that would stop you cold. We'll see you in the next one.